Welcome back to today's Deep Dive, the first intelligence podcast. Today is Saturday, August 2, 2025. Thank you all for sticking with us. You are just amazing. I hope you already follow us on our YouTube channel, Next Site Intelligence, and also on Spotify. Look us up, Deep Dive Intelligence Podcast. And make sure to follow us, so let's not waste your time and let us get to it. Our source for these daily intelligence reports and material we're diving into today is NextSight. They're an amazing and a really dedicated intelligence company focusing on global intelligence. And they've developed their own open source intelligence platform called SiteConnect, which is designed specifically to help investigators globally. I highly recommend you check them out at www.next-site.com. NextSight provides these incredibly detailed intelligence reports to their customers, and they can even customize them to fit specific interests. This is our regular daily deep dive, and this particular deep dive is based on the intelligence brief for Friday, August 2, 2025, covering key global events from August 1st. Today, we're going to unpack that global intelligence brief, diving deep into the key events and, their broader implications.
Yeah, and before we jump into the specific events, it's probably essential to understand the framework NextSight uses to classify their intelligence. It really helps us gauge the trustworthiness and, well, the potential impact of each piece of information. They use three key flags: source reliability, information confidence, and threat level.
Okay, so let's break those down quickly.
Yeah.
Source reliability.
Right, source reliability uses an Admiralty scale, A to F. A means the source is completely reliable, rock solid. B is usually reliable, C is fairly reliable, D is not usually reliable, E is unreliable, and F just means it cannot be judged. So that tells you about the who providing the information, essentially.
Got it. And then the what's of the information, right? Information confidence. How sure are we about the fact itself?
Exactly. That's a 1 to 6 scale. 1 means it's confirmed by independent sources. That's the gold standard, highest confidence. Yeah. 2 is probably true. 3 is possibly true. Then you get into 4, doubtfully true. 5 is improbable. And 6, like F, means it cannot be judged. And finally, there's the threat level system. It's based on the UK model, and it applies to specific threats, often economic or security ones. It ranges from low, where an attack is highly unlikely, all the way up to critical, meaning an attack is expected, like imminently. You might also hear modifiers, little pluses or minuses, like moderate plus or substantial. We'll mention these flags as we go through the items just to give you that full picture of each piece of intelligence.
Perfect. Let's start then with the executive summary. This kind of distills the most consequential events from August 1st. The bottom line up front, or BLUF conclusions, really set the stage. What's the biggest takeaway for you from this summary?
Well, the immediate global market shock is undeniable. President Trump's sweeping tariff increases really sent North American and European stocks spiraling. We saw their worst decline since, April? What's interesting, though, is how some Asian nations actually found a degree of relief. They got lower tariff rates. But at the same time, you saw new diplomatic rifts opening up with countries like Switzerland and New Zealand. Big tariffs for them.
So a really highly differentiated impact then. And that wasn't the only thing driving market anxiety, was it?
No, not at all. A global risk-off sentiment really intensified. That was largely due to, weak U.S. payroll data and accelerating jobless claims. This has really heightened expectations for a Federal Reserve rate cut. People are betting on it now. And on another front, you saw the conflict in Gaza, Yemen, and the West Bank escalating again. More civilian casualties, missile interceptions, and alarmingly, the humanitarian crises in Nigeria and the Sahel worsened significantly. That's amidst aid cuts and the formal withdrawal of military regimes from ECOWAS.
Wow, okay. That's a lot to take in just from the summary. Let's break it down into the key judgments for a more structured overview. First, that tariff shockwave. The U.S. imposed these really steep tariffs, 10 to 41% on dozens of countries. Brazil hit with 50%, Switzerland 39%, New Zealand 15%. What was the immediate fallout from that?
Well, you saw immediate massive market sell-offs across North America and Europe. Just boom. It's a stark contrast to emerging Asian economies like, say, Thailand and Malaysia.
Oh.
Their rates were set lower, around 19%. They actually viewed it as a relative win, believe it or not. But then you look at African states like South Africa, they're now facing warnings of up to 100,000 potential job losses. So it's a highly targeted and very impactful policy.
100,000 jobs. That's a huge economic ripple effect. Okay, next judgment. Labor market weakness. U.S. non-farm payroll growth slowed way down, just 73,000 in July, and unemployment ticked up to 4.3%. How did investors react to that?
Oh, this really deepened the pessimism among investors. It significantly increased the probability of a Fed rate cut, and that, in turn, pushed bond yields lower and boosted gold prices as people look for safe havens. It's a pretty clear indicator that the U.S. economy is, slowing down.
Okay. Moving to the Middle East instability, we saw continued Israeli operations in Gaza and the West Bank, civilian injuries reported, and another missile interception from Yemen's Houthi rebels.
Yeah, and this section also highlights a, let's say, controversial U.S.-backed aid operation in Gaza. Despite a U.S. envoy praising it, the UN actually condemned it. They cited unsafe conditions, which really raises serious questions about the safety and, frankly, the efficacy of aid delivery in active conflict zones.
Right, very tricky situation there. Then the African crises deepen. Aid cuts putting 1.4 million Nigerians at risk of starvation, and the formal withdrawal of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso from ECOWAS. That sounds like it could unravel regional cooperation.
It really threatens to. And you've also got South Africa battling to renegotiate those heavy U.S. tariffs, trying desperately to save those 100,000 jobs we mentioned. So yeah, it's a really complex mix of humanitarian and geopolitical challenges unfolding right across the continent.
Okay, the fifth key judgment points to political upheaval in Latin America. Colombia's former president, Alvaro Uribe, sentenced to 12 years house arrest. That seems pretty significant for accountability. And in Brazil, their Supreme Court is openly defying U.S. sanctions during coup investigations.
Yeah, that assertion of judicial independence, especially in Brazil, is fascinating to watch. It could set an important precedent, for how other nations might respond to external pressures, especially from powerful global players like the U.S.
Interesting point. And finally, the sixth judgment. Oceania's mixed fortunes.
Mhm.
Australia kept a relatively low 10% tariff and now seems poised to grab market share, while New Zealand gets hit with 15%. Industry groups there are warning it's going to really hurt their exporters.
Exactly. A clear divergence based on those tariff decisions.
Okay, now let's shift gears slightly to the spotlight themes. This is where we connect the dots, right? Look for those underlying dynamics and correlations. What insights can we draw here?
Absolutely. The first theme is tariff escalation and market turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
So on August 1st, the MSCI Global Equity Index fell 1.8%. Europe's STOXX 600 dropped 1.9%. That was right after the U.S. tariff announcements. We also saw U.S. 10-year Treasury yields dip, while gold predictably rose. What's really noteworthy is the strong negative correlation we observe, basically, when tariff news gets more intense, global equity markets tend to fall significantly.
So beyond the stated goal of protecting U.S. industry, what's the sort of hidden agenda potentially playing out here?
Well, the scattered exemptions like Australia getting 10%, parts of Southeast Asia getting 19%, it really suggests the White House is using these tariffs more like a strategic tool. It seems aimed at coercing bilateral concessions from other nations. It's less a uniform policy, more targeted leverage. The big implication for everyone, is a significant risk of a synchronized global economic slowdown. Exporters in Switzerland, Brazil, South Africa, they're bracing for sharp margin compression. Meanwhile, countries like Malaysia and Thailand, with their relatively lower rates, might actually gain some market share by attracting diverted trade.
That really does sound like a strategic chessboard being played.
Yeah.
Okay, second spotlight theme, labor market softening. U.S. payroll growth slowed dramatically, unemployment rate up.
Yes, and this led rate futures to price in a really high chance, something like 70% of a Fed rate cut in September. There's a clear negative correlation here, too, between job surprises and stock market moves. When job growth disappoints, markets tend to react negatively. Now, the hidden agenda for policymakers might actually be, a welcome slowdown, in a way. It could provide the justification they need for interest rate cuts, which would then help alleviate pressure from any tariff-induced inflation. For you, this means reduced labor tightness could soften consumer confidence, and that could potentially undermine President Trump's re-election narrative. Companies are already preparing for softer demand.
Interesting political dimension there. Okay, third spotlight theme, fragmenting regional orders. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso pulling out of ECOWAS, Switzerland threatening tariff retaliation, Germany putting the brakes on Palestinian state recognition. What's the deeper implication?
What's fascinating here is how these actions expose vulnerabilities in, existing global alliances. The hidden agenda, potentially, is that nations like Russia and China might be looking to exploit these weakened blocs, particularly those aligned with Western interests. They could use this fragmentation to expand their own influence, especially in Africa and the Middle East. For businesses and investors, the implications are pretty stark. If you rely on ECOWAS trade routes or, say, Swiss-US supply chains, reviewing contingency plans is now critical. This kind of diplomatic uncertainty just significantly increases investment risk in places like West Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean.
That really brings home how interconnected all these global events are. Okay, let's go region by region now, diving into some of the specific reports. And for each, we'll look at the details and, importantly, those reliability and confidence flags you mentioned earlier. First up, North America. The headlines were really dominated by markets reacting to jobs and tariffs. Global stocks sinking.
Right. That report had source reliability B, usually reliable, and information confidence 2, probably true. The threat level was moderate, reflecting potential economic impact. It showed global equities and U.S. markets slumping hard after that sluggish job growth and Trump's steep tariffs. Investors fled to safety bonds, gold.
And that tied into the labor market news itself.
Exactly. Labor market cracks widening as job growth stalls. That was also B2, but threat level low, as it's more an economic indicator than an immediate threat. Only 73,000 jobs added in July, the smallest gain in 2 years. Businesses cited uncertainty.
And the tariffs themselves got another headline.
Yes, markets dive after Trump hits more countries with steep tariffs. This one was flagged B3 moderate. Possibly true on the confidence, maybe reflecting some initial uncertainty on the exact scope or implementation. It detailed the high rates for Switzerland, 39%, Canada and Brazil, 35%, effective August 8th, aimed at currency manipulators, supposedly.
And there was some non-economic news, too.
Yeah, 2 interesting side notes. NASA's Crew 11 launches to the ISS as Boeing's Starliner remains grounded. C2 low. Fairly reliable source, probably true info, low threat. Highlights reliance on SpaceX due to Boeing's issues. And then, ex-BLS commissioner denounces firing as markets slide. C3 low. This former official called the firing chilling interference. Adds to that policy uncertainty feel.
Okay, moving across to Europe, despite some positive bank stress tests, the mood seemed pretty downbeat there too, especially regarding trade.
Definitely. While the report EU banks can weather a trade war recession came in strong, B to low, showing banks could handle a severe scenario. The immediate market reaction told a different story. European shares logged their biggest daily drop since April, B3 moderate. The SecToXX 600 plunged 1.9% if the U.S. tariffs hit.
And Switzerland's reaction stood out.
Hugely. Switzerland, stunned by U.S. tariff hike, seeks talks. B3 moderate. They expressed shock at that 39% rate, warned about job losses. It's significant because another report, U.S. delays EU duties but imposes sweeping tariffs elsewhere, C3 moderate. Confirmed the EU bloc got a delay, but Switzerland and Norway got hit hard immediately. Shows that targeted approach again.
Any other notable items from Europe?
2 court rulings. Volkswagen liable for defeat devices, top EU court rules, B2 low, though compensation was capped. And EU court clears Spanish wind farms to proceed, C2 low, ending long litigation and clearing the way for about €1 billion in investment. Positive for renewables there.
Right. Over in Asia, then, it sounds like a real mixed bag of reactions to the tariffs.
That's a good way to put it. You had relief in Southeast Asia as U.S. tariffs level the playing field, B to low. Countries like Thailand and Malaysia were happy with the reduced 19% rate, but contrast that with the Bank of Japan warning tariffs could hit profits and capex, B to moderate. They saw cuts coming as export prices had already fallen 20% since April.
And Bangladesh managed to negotiate.
They did. Bangladesh secured a 20% U.S. tariff, B to low, for its huge garment export industry. Big relief there, potentially saving billions. More broadly, the global reactions to Trump's tariff hikes piece, C3 moderate. Just summarize the spectrum: China warning, Japan's Korea getting 15%, and so on.
Anything else major out of Asia?
Well, geopolitically, Japan says Myanmar elections cannot proceed without releasing detainees, B2 moderate, was a strong stance, linking election legitimacy to freeing Aung San Suu Kyi and others. And a brief ASEAN headlines roundup in the C3 low noted Malaysia delaying water tariff hikes domestically, alongside confirmation of their 19% U.S. tariff.
Okay, turning now to the Middle East, ongoing tensions seem to be, well, ongoing, still a significant concern.
Very much so. The report, U.S. envoy visits contested Gaza aid operation, C3 high, really underscored the complexity. The site was condemned by the UN as unsafe, especially after Israeli forces killed Palestinians nearby, yet the U.S. envoy praised it. High threat level there.
And more violence reported.
Tragically, yes. Israeli forces shoot woman in Tulkarem refugee camp, C3 high. An 18-year-old woman wounded at a camp under siege since January. Again, high threat assessment. On the broader security front, Israel intercepts missile launched from Yemen, B3 high. That was by Houthi rebels, showing the continued threat to shipping in southern Israel. High threat again.
Any diplomatic moves?
Germany made a clarification. Germany clarified no immediate Palestinian recognition, B too low. They stressed it's a final step, likely to reassure Israel. Low threat on that one. And reflecting the global mood, UAE markets decline on profit booking and tariff tensions, B to low. Local profit-taking mixed with wider risk aversion.
Right. Africa, too, seems to be facing a convergence of crises, humanitarian and economic.
Absolutely. The headline, Aid Cuts and Political Ruptures Across Africa, C3 High, captured it starkly. Food aid cut for 1.4 million Nigerians due to donor fatigue. And simultaneously, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso formally left ECOWAS, which really threatens regional stability and trade. High threat level assigned.
And South Africa's tariff struggle continues.
Yes, South Africa is negotiating hard to avoid a 30% U.S. tariff. C3 moderate. The central bank warned about those 100,000 job losses. Moderate threat level. A related piece. U.S. slaps Africa with new tariff rates. Mixed reactions. C3 moderate. Detailed the 30% for South Africa, 15% for Lesotho, 10% for Kenya. Some felt lucky compared to Brazil, others braced for impact. And finally, South Africa's exporters braced for disruption as U.S. tariff deadline passes. C3 moderate. They were rushing shipments and talking up BRICS partnerships.
Okay, let's pivot to Latin America. Some really significant political and economic developments there.
Yeah, quite a bit happening. The Colombian ex-president Uribe, sentenced to 12 years of house arrest, B to moderate, was a major event, really highlighting judicial independence. Moderate threat, perhaps due to potential political instability.
And a migration story involving Costa Rica.
Right, a leaked document showed U.S. plans to fund deportations from Costa Rica, B3 moderate, reallocating $7.85 million from economic support to Homeland Security aimed at deterring migration. Possibly true. Moderate threat level may be reflecting regional tensions.
And that defiance from Brazil's judiciary.
Yes, Brazilian judge vows to ignore U.S. sanctions. C3 moderate. Justice Moraes pushing back hard against U.S. interference in the Bolsonaro coup trial. Again, possibly true info, moderate threat due to potential diplomatic fallout.
What about resource and finance news?
In Chile, Codelco halted El Teniente mine after a collapse. B to moderate, that sadly killed one worker. It's a huge copper mine, so prolonged closure could tighten global supply. Moderate threat to supply chains. Brazil also moved on finance. Brazil tightening credit fund rules to curb bank risk-taking. B to low. Doubling banks' contributions to the guarantee fund to boost stability. Low threat level. And a positive note for Mexico. Fitch upgraded Pemex on stronger government support, B1 low. That's confirmed info, low threat. Government guarantees are lowering borrowing costs for the state oil company.
Okay, and finally wrapping up the regional tour, Oceania and the Pacific. The tariff decisions there seem to have created a clear split.
A very clear split. Australia eyed more U.S. exports as tariffs remained at 10%, B to low. Their trade minister was basically celebrating, seeing opportunities as New Zealand got hit harder, likely influenced by IACUS's ties. Low threat for Australia. Another report, Australia dodges latest Trump tariff hikes. C2 low. Confirm this, minimizing the export impact for them.
But a different story for New Zealand.
Completely different. New Zealand Business Forum criticized 15% U.S. tariff, C3 moderate, warning of significant pain for exporters, especially dairy, wine, meat, possibly true info, moderate economic threat. And the government confirmed 15% tariff under Trump order, C3 moderate, expressing disappointment but admitting little leverage. That could cost them up to NZ $900 million in export revenue.
Wow. It's easy to get lost in all that data, geopolitics, the market swings. But what did ordinary people actually think and feel about these events? Let's turn to the People's Hearsay section. This gives us that crucial human element, right?
Exactly. This section pulls insights from social media, news comments, really trying to get the pulse on public sentiment. So in North America, you saw palpable anger about the tariff hikes. Hashtags like hashtag tariff trauma, hashtag jobs report were everywhere. One post that got shared a lot really captured it. How do you expect us to afford groceries when both wages and stocks are falling? Real frustration there. And the firing of the BLS commissioner, that sparked genuine outrage online. People called it an assault on transparency, proof of political interference.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of frustration and, frankly, distrust building up. How about over in Europe?
In Europe, you saw deep dismay, especially from Swiss and German citizens, over that 39% U.S. tariff. There's a tweet from a Swiss watchmaker kind of embodying their artisan industry, saying the levy would destroy artisan jobs just to appease Trump's ego. Pretty strong words. But then, conversely, in Spain, supporters of those wind farm projects were celebrating the court ruling. Messages like, finally, progress beats obstruction. The real split sentiment, indignation over trade, but some optimism on other fronts.
Okay. And what was the mood like in Asia? Were they celebrating those lower rates?
Some definitely were. In Malaysia and Thailand, there was this noticeable sense of relief, almost celebration, over the 19% tariff cap. Social media had memes comparing it to a discount sale, which is, an interesting take. However, in Japan, Users were sharing concerns about potential layoffs if corporate profits kept falling due to tariffs. Real anxiety there. And for Bangladeshi garment workers, that negotiated 20% rate was widely described online as a lifeline, something that prevented truly catastrophic job losses.
Right. Huge difference depending on the country. The situation in the Middle East is always incredibly complex. What were people saying on the ground there?
Well, Palestinians and Israeli activists were heavily using platforms like Instagram and Telegram to document the Tulkarm raid. Graphic videos of the wounded woman spread very widely, fueling criticism of Israeli military actions. On the other side, Houthi supporters in Yemen were proudly claiming their missile launch was a warning shot.
Mm.
Meanwhile, Israeli accounts emphasized the successful interceptions by their defense systems. So you see these deeply divided narratives playing out in real time online.
Yeah, starkly different perspectives. And how did people in Africa react to those aid cuts and the tariffs that are hitting their livelihoods so hard?
In Nigeria, people protested the WFP aid cuts using the hashtag #FeedNortheast. They shared these really stark images of empty food stores calling for urgent domestic donations. In South Africa, on X, formerly Twitter users were highly critical of their government. Lots of comments about begging Washington.
Yeah.
And there was a strong push online urging diversification towards BRICS markets, reflecting this growing sentiment for self-reliance and looking for alternative partnerships.
Interesting shift in public opinion there. And Latin America, with those surprising political developments like the Uribe sentencing.
Yeah, Colombian social media was, perhaps predictably, split right down partisan lines on Uribe's sentence. His supporters decried it as a political witch hunt, pure and simple. His opponents hailed it as long overdue justice, a reckoning for the powerful. Costa Ricans, meanwhile, voiced strong concerns about being essentially forced to police U.S. borders. One comment that got a lot of traction was, "We are not Trump's wall." Brazilians, though, took a more defiant, often humorous tone towards the U.S. sanctions. Hashtags like #Moraes vs. Trump were trending. And people shared memes of judges wearing earplugs, a direct, mocking reference to Justice Moraes publicly vowing to ignore Washington.
Huh, okay. And finally, what was the sentiment down in Oceania, Australia versus New Zealand?
New Zealand exporters were openly venting frustration over that 15% tariff. The hashtag #NotFairNZ was trending locally. You could feel the anger. Australian farmers, totally different story. They posted celebratory photos, gleefully captioning them 10% tariff club, a clear sign of relief and, let's be honest, seeing a competitive advantage. But there was also a poignant point raised by some in the Maori community. They questioned why indigenous exports were being treated like luxury goods, subject to the same duties, highlighting a kind of cultural and economic nuance missed in the broader debate.
Fascinating insights from the ground level. Okay, now for the correlational analysis. This is where we look at the quantified relationships, right? And maybe uncover some potential hidden agendas behind these events, really connecting the data points.
Exactly. First, tariffs versus equity prices. That announcement of U.S. tariffs hitting 50 countries coincided directly with those big drops in Europe's STOXX 600 and the S&P 500. Our analysis showed a strong negative correlation, roughly -0.74, between tariff news intensity and global equity performance. The hidden agenda here seems clear. While the White House might frame tariffs as a negotiation tactic, the markets see them, plain and simple, as growth-sapping taxes. They immediately hit corporate valuations and investor confidence.
Yeah, market reaction was pretty unambiguous. Next, labor data versus bond yields.
Right, the weak U.S. payroll report led to that notable decline in the 10-year Treasury yield, about 11 basis points. Historical data shows this negative correlation around -0.65 between payroll surprises and yield changes. Investors anticipate monetary easing when jobs data weakens. The hidden agenda. Well, the administration might actually tolerate, maybe even quietly welcome, softer labor data if it provides the justification needed for interest rate cuts. Cuts which would support asset prices, something quite useful in an election year, wouldn't you say?
A politically convenient outcome, perhaps. Okay, third correlation, one with a very direct impact on people's lives. Aid cuts versus food prices.
This one's stark. Nigeria's food aid reduction correlated directly with a 5% rise in local grain prices within just 1 week. The hidden agenda behind this often points to, sadly, donor fatigue and a shifting of international priorities, maybe towards Ukraine, maybe Gaza. The clear implication, though, is that this rapid food inflation could further destabilize an already fragile region and significantly fuel increased migration flows. It's a humanitarian crisis with security implications.
A grim connection. Then there's tariff differentials versus trade diversion, the Australian-New Zealand split again.
Precisely. Australia's better 10% tariff versus New Zealand's 15% has already triggered a forecasted 8% shift in U.S. import orders toward Australian suppliers. This really highlights a potential hidden agenda. Washington appears to be rewarding key security partners, like Australia through aid use, over countries perceived as more neutral. It looks like a strategic use of trade policy to reinforce specific alliances.
Using trade as a tool of statecraft. Okay, and finally, sanctions versus judicial independence in Brazil.
Yes, the U.S. sanctions targeting Brazilian judges coincided with a drop in the Brazilian real and a 2% dip in the Bovespa stock index. These sanctions seem designed on the surface to pressure the courts regarding specific investigations, maybe Bolsonaro's. But the broader hidden agenda might be about extracting trade concessions from Brazil down the line. The implication we're seeing is that judicial defiance, like Justice Moraes' stance, might rally strong domestic support, but it definitely increases market volatility and uncertainty in the short term.
Really complex dynamics at play. So after unpacking all of this, what does it all mean for you, the informed listener? These insights aren't just for, corporate strategists or government officials. They highlight the powerful forces shaping our world, and understanding them matters to everyone.
Absolutely. First, it underscores the need to think about diversifying supply chains. Understanding these global trade policies reveals both opportunities and, frankly, critical risks in how goods are produced and moved. For you, this means recognizing how a political decision somewhere else can directly impact the availability and, the cost of everyday goods you rely on.
And given all this market turmoil we've discussed, maybe enhance financial hedging.
That's certainly something to consider. Markets are clearly volatile. Knowing how currency values and interest rates react to this kind of news is crucial. It helps you understand not just economic stability on a macro scale, but also your own personal financial landscape, your investments. It's about being proactive, anticipating shifts.
It also seems to highlight the power of a collective voice, doesn't it? Maybe engage in policy advocacy.
Yes, absolutely. Your collective voice can genuinely influence trade policies. We saw how some nations successfully negotiated better tariff rates. Collaboration, lobbying, it can secure carve-outs, reduce duties. It really demonstrates the tangible power of, coming together in this globalized world.
And sadly, given the instability in several regions, it points to the need to develop contingency plans for instability.
It does. Political upheaval, humanitarian crises like we saw in Nigeria or Gaza, they impact real people first and foremost, but also global stability. Understanding these risks helps you anticipate the ripple effects, whether it's on supply chains, migration patterns, global aid efforts, and how they might affect your broader world.
And finally, this all seems to tie into increase ESG due diligence, environmental, social, governance factors.
It really does. This is about recognizing the growing importance of ethical supply chains and human rights amidst all these global events. Knowing how companies respond to issues like forced labor or conflict zones or environmental impact matters, it helps mitigate reputational damage for businesses, sure, but for you, it means being a more informed consumer, a more informed investor, and understanding the broader social impact of global trade and investment decisions.
This deep dive has truly given us a really comprehensive look at the Global Intelligence Brief for Friday, August 2, 2025. It's such a complex tapestry, isn't it? Economic shifts, political maneuvering, humanitarian concerns, all playing out simultaneously on the world stage. So let me leave you with a final thought to mull over. How do these seemingly disparate events, a tariff hike here, a jobs report there, a conflict thousands of miles away, how do they actually weave together to fundamentally reshape our interconnected world? And maybe more importantly, what will be the next ripple effect you observe? Do not forget to follow us on YouTube and Spotify. Also like, share, and comment. We do look forward to hearing your opinion. This is it for today. Enjoy your start of the week.